I'll give you my 2-minute spiel on what we are. We're Baltimore UnderGround Science Space. I'm Lisa, I'm the executive director. We are a community lab, and so we're one of kind of a national movement of DIY bio community lab organizations. We really have 2 parts to our mission. One is educational, so we have seminars like this, we have courses, we bring in kids and do school programs with them and that kind of thing. And the other, our goal is to provide lab access to people. So people who are not affiliated with academic research laboratories, but might have ideas or be inspired or want to try things out. We really want to democratize science and have people know that science is for everyone. It doesn't end when you graduate high school and got out of chemistry class. So I'm happy to answer any questions. If you want to be on our mailing list, sign up right there. And
also, one thing, if you feel like, if you feel like donating, there's a bowl right here.
We are a nonprofit. Mary, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, is this the clip? Okay. So I'm Naomi Charalambakis. I work at FASEB. Thank you all for having me. And it's I'm sorry that Yvette, my boss, could not be here. She had to give a talk to the EPA today, so I came in her place. I'll try and do my best to replace her. So I'm going to talk to you today about shaping science policy and a little bit about what FASEB is, what we do, and how we can shape policy and how the public also plays a role in that. How do I move forward?
I can click on
it. Is it this one? This one?
This one right here.
Ah, I was going backwards. Okay. So just to give an overview of what FASEB's mission is, it's pretty straightforward. We are here to advance health and welfare by promoting progress and education in the biomedical sciences through service to our member societies and collaborative advocacy. And so FASEB is actually the nation's largest coalition of biomedical research, and we are actually recognized by the NIH, by NSF, and by other federal agencies as the policy voice. So oftentimes when policies get written up, FDA and NIH and NSF, they come back and they want to know our opinion. So we do have a good reputation in the federal agencies. So who are we? We make up actually 29 different professional societies, as you can see here, ranging from genetics to endocrine society to the protein society. And so we actually represent over 130,000 scientists and engineers. So this really goes back to how FASEB serves as a voice for so many different people, because there's strength in numbers, especially when it comes to policy. And if FASEB represents this big chunk of people and we want to make a statement about something, we can be a voice for all of these individuals. So what exactly do? We work with our member societies and their representatives, and we work to develop and form policies, positions that promote research and education in the sciences. And we serve as the representatives for all of those member societies in those policy discussions. Because a lot of times we go to the NIH, to the NSF, and we take part in those policy discussions, and we say, well, our concerns from our member societies are this, this, and this. And like I mentioned, when we speak with a unified voice, our member societies can really maximize their influence on public policy. So I am a science policy analyst, so I work in the Office of Public Affairs, and there's 2 arms in the public affairs. There's the science policy team, and then there's the legislative team. But we work closely together because it takes both of those departments to really make the public affairs department effective. Our main job is to coordinate advocacy by scientists, because we are all scientists, and we work to create policies and positions for other scientists. And we do that by developing policy statements, other advocacy strategies. We conduct a lot of policy research. We do a lot of reading and writing. We create a lot of advocacy tools. So these resources, like this fact sheet that you see up here, shows the breakdown of how much federal funding from the NIH, from the NSF, goes to all these different institutions in Maryland. And Baltimore makes up 3 districts. So we have District 2, 3, and 7, I believe. And so we have fact sheets. They are online available. We have some available here right now. that show exactly how much federal dollars goes towards biomedical research and which institutions they go toward. So you can see how much the state, the districts depend on this federal funding, and we are here to raise that awareness. We provide a lot of support in Washington, so our legislative team goes up to the Hill all the time, and we have discussions with policymakers, with committee staffers, and we make sure to arrange meetings with them too, because we want to start conversations. If that conversation is not happening, there's a topic that needs to be happening, then we will try to make that happen. So all of this depends on communication with our member societies, what do they want, our advocacy partners, policymakers, and the general public. So if we can all get on the same page, we can move forward and make progress. So I mentioned that there are two arms. There's the science policy team and the legislative team. And science policy, it's a big term, so I want to mention that there's really two ways to think about it. There's science for policy, so that's applying your scientific expertise to help drive those policies and to make those policies. But there's also policy for scientists, for science, which is what I basically work on. So we look at the laws, the regulations, and the policies that are affecting the scientists and the researchers. So I make sure if NIH comes up with a policy, did you have a question? Oh, okay. So if NIH comes up with a policy and I think that will affect scientists, I will research that and I will communicate back with the scientists. And what do you feel about that? As a scientist, I know, just fresh from the lab, I know, wait, that's not going to work. That's not enough federal funding. It's just not going to fly. So we're that go-between. So there's really two aspects to it that I wanted to highlight.
So Naomi, because you are such a big umbrella organization, does that mean that all your work is at the federal level and none really at the individual state level?
That's correct. We focus more on federal. Yeah. But, I mean, there's always a push to communicate more with state groups and make sure that we can work together. And if we can hear from those groups, that'd be even better.
Just because I know that so much policy around, especially healthcare, is done at the state level, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the restrictions we see coming in now are at the state level. So.
We were actually very involved with Maryland passed a mandatory adoption bill. I think it was last year. There was a lot of talk about that, so we were very active in that. So essentially this law was saying that animals, once the experiments are complete, they have to be adopted out. But as you know, in science that can be kind of complicated because if there's a virus that's used that's not good for others to be exposed to, that's not really a good thing to promote. So we had to work with other organizations. So at some points on certain issues we do work at the state level.
Having been a part of that bill,
Yeah.
it's never good to be on the other side of the animal folks. Just
I know. I mean, I have
so I can imagine that was challenging.
I will get into that because my whole portfolio is animals and research. So
Is it
I
under the
have a lot
Puppets Act?
of. Do what?
Puppets?
Yeah. I have a lot of stories of. Yeah.
But you're not elected, so it's okay.
I know. That's true. That's true. So who actually drives policy development? And that comes from the top all the way down. So as you can see, the president has, and the Office of Science, Technology, Policy has a large role. Legislative branch, of course, the Supreme Court, and then the federal agencies, but all the way down to, as you can see, professional organizations like FASEB, think tanks, disease advocacy organizations. They all play a role in this. And so our main thing at FASEB is we need to build those bridges in between everyone and make sure that the communication is happening because that's oftentimes where progress gets stalled, is there's no communication. So I'm going to take a step back a little and tell you a little how FASEB got started. We are actually over 100 years old, and it started back in 1912 with just 9 scientists from 3 different societies. And their main problem in the research community was they wanted to find a way to increase scientific society's capability to promote the research. They needed a platform, and they also really wanted to increase awareness and access to animal models. I mean, it's been a problem for decades, this issue with conducting research in animals. So that leads me into my next kind of spiel, because this is mainly what I work on at FASEB. I am the staff liaison for the Animals in Research and Education Subcommittee. So we have a science policy committee that's then divided into 12 different subcommittees. And our Animals in Research Subcommittee is probably our biggest, most active one, as you can imagine. So we have 5 main goals as a committee, and I won't get into all of the details, but I wanted to highlight numbers 2 and 3, where we monitor and respond to legislation that's ongoing in Congress related to the use of animals, and we develop position papers or statements as necessary. Things like, if you heard, the USDA recently banned research with cats, all of those things like that we have to keep up with to make sure, where does the scientific community stand and where does FASEB stand. Number 3, we develop a lot of educational materials, and we want to, I think that's the hard part. There's a lot of disconnect between what the animal rights groups have been saying and what they creatively have done with the media and what is actually happening in the lab. So if we can be an education, if we can provide educational materials to the public, I think that could really help. So I just got started in November, but I really wanted to try and make this push on this. So 2 things that we've been doing is the animal webinar series. We use different animal models, and we have webinars describing from scientists, from policymakers, why these animal models are necessary and why we can't use any other model. So back in February, we did one on non-human primates, and if you can see here, like the speaker, she showed on the left, you see the field of vision from what a non-human primate would see. And on the right, that is what a mouse would see. So for someone like me who studied vision, it's really important what model you're actually using because what you're studying is different. So you have to put things into context. You have to remember things like spinal cord injury. A lot of times, the VA is currently doing some canine studies right now, and canines are a little bit controversial, not a little bit, a lot, because they're dogs, and we love dogs, and I love dogs. But you can't really use a mouse spinal cord because a mouse spinal cord is that long, and a dog's spinal cord is more similar to a human. So you have to think about scale. Glioblastoma, for example, that can be, which is what John McCain died from. Those tumors can grow to be the size of a mouse. So you can't really use a mouse to study that cancer. So all of those things we kind of need to break down and make it just in a more understandable way for the public. And we need scientists to step up and do that. Just yesterday we had a webinar on canines in biomedical research. And we had 2 representatives from the VA give their, explain the review process behind it. Because it's not that people just use willy-nilly a dog for any study. There has to be a justification for it, and a good one. And if there's not, the VA will tell you, sorry, we're not giving you money because you can do this experiment in a mouse. So things like that. And then we also had fact sheets. So things on canines, all of the drugs and the therapies that have come from research with canines, all the drugs and therapies and breakthroughs that have come from research with felines. So those things put things into perspective, because the more we reduce animal research, it's just one day going to end up hurting the public. It's just bound to. So then lastly, just to wrap up, I wanted to provide one specific example of how FASEB has shaped policy. So when I got started, one of the first things that dropped into my lap was an RFI, a request for information. So does everyone remember the 21st Century Cures Act that was passed? Okay. There's a small part in that 21st Century Cures Act that said that they needed to create a working group from the NIH, FDA, and the USDA to find ways to reduce administrative burden in animal research. If you're familiar with working with animals, there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of burden to deal with IACUCs and veterinary protocols and all of this. So scientists had a major issue, and they told Congress, please find a way to reduce this burden so you can make it easier on all of us and we can get back to doing research. So they came together, they had a working group, and in December they released a report. And the report outlined recommendations on ways institutions can reduce administrative burden with animal research. And so then they said, okay, here it's freely available for the public, let us know what you think. And that's what a request for information is. So FASEB got access to that, and it was our job to read through that, analyze it, consult with our member societies, and say, this is good, this is bad, this is what we want, you didn't address this, you didn't do that. So we wrote a response and we submitted that in February. So this takes a long time. It's a very slow process, as most things go with the government. But what was so great with this response is that it was just like a trickle down effect, because after that we launched a webinar 2-part series. There's a lot of policy and a lot of jargon that people don't understand in these kind of reports, in these kind of responses. So what we did is we did a 2-part series, one series coming from the institutional and the federal perspective, outlining, so we had people from NIH and the USDA saying, this is what NIH wants, this is what you should do, this is how you should do it. Just really straightforward. So that was one webinar. And then we had a second webinar from a PI's perspective, from a scientist's perspective, saying, this is what NIH wants, this is what we're doing, but we shouldn't be doing. So making it easier for everyone to kind of clarify some of the language that we find in the policies. So that's helped us build relationships with federal agencies, and we have really good connections with them now. And that webinar series actually forced the VA and the DoD to reach out to us and say, hey, this has generated a lot of noise, we need to start thinking about the same kind of issues. Because the goal here is to streamline policies across all agencies. Actually, if you think about it, every agency has a different policy for different experiments, and that gets really frustrating. So if we can streamline and make it the same across, then I think it would be easier on all parties. So that is one way that we are trying to shape policy. So it's moving in the right direction, but it's just baby steps. So, and that's it from me. And you can feel free to contact me. I know you, if you guys want to hear about my background and how I got into this role, I'm happy to go into that. Yeah, so I'm very passionate about science policy. I'm fresh from the lab though, so you can quiz me on anything neuroscience. So yeah, and just please feel free to shoot